The controversial Public Order Amendment Bill became law this past Wednesday after emotional public debate. Will the new ordinance ensure a responsible press? Or is it a threat to freedom of speech in Hong Kong? The pros and cons, tonight on Focus. The 1967 riots, a time of violence and confusion in Hong Kong. Political forces were at work, and one of their tools was the press. But the government had laws to control this tool. In 1967, 3 left-wing newspaper publishers were arrested and prosecuted under the Sedition Act. One of them was further charged under the false news section of the Publications Consolidation Ordinance. All 3 were convicted, and their publications were suppressed for 6 months under another section of the Publications Consolidation Ordinance. This man, Sir Alexander Grantham, was governor when the Publications Consolidation Ordinance was first enacted in 1951. What were its origins? One journalist explains.
Ironically, this was basically an anti-communist measure to bring some law and order into the situation. And ironically, very much the same applied to the other emergency powers which were acquired in 1967 as the Cultural Revolution spilt over into the streets of Hong Kong. And the governor and the government acquired these new powers to put journalists in prison, to shut down newspapers, and so on.
But the deputy editor of the Chinese language newspaper, Da Gong Bao, Zhang Duxing, disagrees.
以為過去有一種錯覺，以為一個法例呢，或者嗰個條例呢，就係專門為咗針對左派人士嘅。咁實際上一個法例嘅訂立咗之後呢，就佢寫成白紙黑字嘅條文之後呢，法律面前人人平等，佢就不可能嘅淨係對一部分人有所限制，而對另一部分人呢就可以豁免限制嘅。個實際 個本質呢，正如我所講過嘅呢，個本質其實就係英國香港嘅當局呢，要維持佢喺香港嘅權力嘅一個咁嘅文件嚟。
Zhang's newspaper experienced the effects of the ordinance already in 1952. In March of that year, a train full of official visitors from China were refused entry into Hong Kong. Left-wing sympathizers clashed with police, and riots ensued. The People's Daily in China published an editorial criticizing the Hong Kong government's action, and the Da Gong Bao reprinted that editorial in Hong Kong. The newspaper was suppressed for 6 months under the Publications Consolidation Ordinance. But in recent times, the news media has had little indication that the Publications Consolidation Ordinance even existed. The laws haven't been invoked for 20 years, largely due to the territory's political stability during this time. But the ordinance has recently reclaimed public attention, not because it was being applied, but because it was being revoked. Last year, the Hong Kong Journalists Association and other concerned groups and individuals urged the government to review the ordinance, which they said was draconian and no longer necessary in Hong Kong's present political climate. The result was the Public Order Amendment Bill, introduced into the Legislative Council last December and receiving its 3rd reading in LegCo this past Wednesday.
I emphasize the fact that it followed a long and thorough review of existing legislation dealing with the control of publications in Hong Kong. As a result of that review, which the media asked for and we supported, the bills we introduced into this council repealed, I repeat, repealed the following provisions which had been on the statute book for over 30 years. To make it an offense to print or publish anything of a subversive nature, we've repealed it. To provide for the suppression of newspapers and their publication, we've repealed it. To provide for the prohibition and importation of publications, to provide for the registrar of newspapers to refuse or suspend the registration of news agencies, to provide for the seizure of printing presses, to provide for search, seizure, forfeiture, and the disposal of articles used for the contravening of the ordinance, to allow for the registrar to refuse to license or cancel the license of distributors.
Only one section of the old ordinance has been retained. This one, forbidding publication of false news, which has been shifted to the Public Order Ordinance. But wording has also been changed in a way that some critics say makes the ordinance too vague. Extending the law to cover more than just the local press and definitions of false news and what's likely to cause public disorder have especially come under attack. Changes to the defense clause have also drawn criticism. Some people feel the new clause, by shifting the burden of proof to the defendant instead of the prosecution, is in contravention of common law.
We do know that both the Hong Kong government and business interests, Lord Kadoorie, who is so insistent that Hong Kong should be run not on a democratic basis, but as a public business with himself as the chairman and the chairman of the board.
So Derek Davies believes the false news section was retained at the urgings of big business. He also feels that this section of the ordinance is meant to counter right-wing influence in the territory.
Since the signing of the joint declaration, we have seen some propaganda from Taipei